Good afternoon and welcome back to Storytime. Hope you're having a wonderful week so far. As we continue with our story, Too Much Salt and Pepper by Sam Campbell, we are in Chapter 7, Fweet Fweet for Ferry Service. Inky's abrupt behavior did not banish our sympathy for Salt, however. This little fellow's mental suffering was too obvious, too real. It was a disconsolate porcupine that met us that night when we returned from our fruitless search for his mate. We could hear his mournful cries long before we reached the island. He was at the landing waiting for us as if hopeful that we would bring news of Pepper. He followed close at our heels as we walked up the path, talking his sorrow in a way that made us kneel beside him frequently to pet and comfort him. But not even Jenny's lullaby song could give him peace. Even in the manner that had made him so happy in times past, he emitted his mournful little cries of loneliness. It may be that we human beings learn only things when facts come to us in a way that hurts a little. It hurt us to see Salt so grieved. We had seen Salt and Pepper play together and laughed at the fun they were having, but we had not been impressed with the serious and sound nature of their friendship. Now Salt's heartache echoed a pain within our own hearts. We knew how attached he must have been to be hurt so deeply, and we understood. Never again would we doubt the affection of porcupines for one another. Nor did the fact that Pepper would leave Salt dispute the presence of devotion in her heart. We recalled how through days and nights she had been endeavoring to take him with her, coaxing him toward the woods. The wilderness had won. Yet we could not doubt that wherever she was enduring the same loneliness we were watching in Salt. Throughout the remainder of the night, Salt called and searched. We heard him under the house, we heard him in the far corners of the island, we heard him high in the trees. For a brief moment there was his crunch, crunch, crunch on the front door sill, but there was no double crunch. He moved on. He gave the screen door only a disinterested passing scratch, took only a half-hearted bite at the floor joist, then wailed on as he explored the dark corners under the cabin. Dawn found him tired by his ceaseless searching. He had climbed to a favorite spot on the cabin roof and sought to lose his sorrow in sleep. But even then, he would arouse occasionally and give a pitiful call, beginning high and descending in tone until it ended in a little groan of hopelessness. Pepper did not return, and the experience marks the beginning of the maturity of Salt. His baby days were done. He was an adult porcupine now, and must live as such. There were larger problems before him than just to pester us, though he found most effective ways to carry on that too. Passing days silenced his mourning, and in many ways he showed happiness again. But he was never the playboy porcupine he had been. His affection for us was not changed in the least. He would nestle in our arms, climb to our shoulders, sleep in our laps, and he came regularly for Jenny's lullaby ceremony, which he loved. But he was very quiet about it all. Salt will not be with us long, I think, Jenny said. He is doing the same things Pepper did before she left. It was now over 2 weeks since the disappearance of Pepper. We found Salt exploring the extremes of the island, and sometimes in the shallow waters looking and sniffing toward the mainland. Often he lay on that low limb of an oak where Pepper stayed so much, staring out into the darkness and silence of the night. Certainly that mysterious something in nature... Careful there, little girl. Certainly that mysterious something in nature or within himself which dictates the moves of animals was hard at work. We were not surprised one night when we returned from a canoe ride to note Salt was not at the dock to meet us. He did not answer our calls. He was not under the cabin nor on the roof. Bread left on the back step for him had not been touched. "He's gone," said Jenny with conviction. Yes, he had gone. We searched the island, but he was not to be found. That which we had hoped for and yet had half dreaded had happened. He was pushing back his horizons, expanding his world, and this was as we would have it. "Goodbye, Salt," we called into the night, toward the mainland. "Goodbye. And remember, that means God be with you." We searched but little for Salt and Pepper after that, though every porcupine we met in the woods during those days was addressed by their names. Many reports were brought to us by people who knew of our pets. A timber cruiser had seen a porcupine near an old deserted cabin and was startled at the animal's friendliness. We went to the cabin, but the animal had disappeared. A neighbor had a big old porcupine settled under his house, and was astonished when the creature came up and scratched on his door. That scratching sounded promising, and we went on the double quick to his cabin. but the old porcupine we found there resembled neither Salt nor Pepper, and would have nothing to do with us. A fisherman saw 2 porcupines along the lake shore, and noted how the animals walked far out on a log as if trying to reach his boat. We bent our canoe paddles like bows to reach the place in a hurry, but no porcupines were around. The news of Salt and Pepper's wanderings produced another sharp reaction. "They can't do that to me," wrote Carol in reply to our letter. "Don't they know it is only 482 hours and 36 minutes until I'll be there? Now it's only 35 minutes. My watch is 5 minutes slow, so it's only 30. They must hurry back. I want them right where I can grab them up and hug them, quills and all." We hoped it could be as she wished, but we learned to command nature to do just as she pleases if we want to be obeyed. She does not bend herself to our whims. One realization gave us much satisfaction. If Salt and Pepper, either one or both, were there to greet Carol, it would be from choice. It would not be because they were on an island from which they did not know how to escape. They were on their own now, living a life of freedom and responsibility. They were entirely independent. Their decisions and actions would be purely porcupine in nature. We promised Carol we would wire her if and when the porkies returned. I have often said that those porcupines had the most uncanny sense of what they shouldn't do, and the greatest determination to do it of any animals I have ever seen. Their sense of humor was mixed with intuition and a certain maliciousness. They always did what we hoped they wouldn't do, and our next porcupine adventure was certainly of this nature. Across the little stretch of water from our island, on a point of land, lived our nearest neighbors. They have a lovely little log cabin standing in the midst of stately young pines. Better neighbors could not be found. They seldom borrow, but are always willing to lend. They never impose, but are always anxious to favor. They mind their own business and like it. We seldom exchange visits, though through the years we have felt a friendship that is fine and satisfying. The last thing in the world we would want to do is to annoy them or impose on them in any way. Imagine our concern one fine August evening, then, when we were paddling by our neighbor's cabin and heard him saying in an excited and distressed sort of way, "Now go on, get away, don't climb on me, I don't want you. Get up a tree. Ouch, stop biting. Get back there and let me alone, or I'll pull every quill out of your hide. Quills, biting, climb a tree? Only one living thing could call for such words." "We'd better hurry," said Jenny with concern. I answered with a stroke of my paddle that sent our canoe toward our neighbor's pier. We landed hurriedly and went toward the cabin, flashlights in hand, to find just what we had expected and feared. There was Salt, champion pest of the universe, working overtime at his talent. My neighbor had a bucket in his hand and was trying desperately to get to a nearby pump, while Salt whirled about acting tough and occasionally making runs at the man. Inside the screen door, the lady of the house stood looking out helplessly. "Is this thing yours?" demanded the man in tones that were remarkably friendly, everything considered. "If it is, take it away from here. Take it a long way off, and don't let it come back ever." Yes, that thing was ours. Salt recognized us and came running to meet us. He grunted happily in greeting and reached up his front feet to be taken. "Salt, you old scamp," I said, embarrassed at the whole situation. "Of all places, why did you have to come here? What have you been doing?" "What has he been doing?" challenged my neighbor. "Just making life miserable for us, that's what." And then, while Salt sat contentedly on my shoulder, chewing on my head, we listened to a story that made our apology sound woefully inadequate. Our neighbors had been sleeping on their screened front porch, resting wonderfully in the famed quiet and coolness of the North Woods. Right in the middle of their deepest sleep and finest dreams, they had been awakened by a call just outside the screen door. Honk, honk, honk had come the sound, sharp and startling in the still night. The people sat up and listened. Again the call, almost beside them. Flashlights were pointed through the screen, and there sat a porcupine looking in at them, obviously quite friendly and not the least bit surprised at what he was doing. Puzzled, our neighbors returned to bed and tried to sleep, saying he'll go away in a few minutes. But Porky didn't go away. His calls grew louder and louder. When the neighbors buried their heads under covers to escape from the annoyance, a new sound demanded their attention. Crunch, crunch, crunch came from the doorsill. Flashlights were brought into play again, and the man looked upon great slivers of wood being bitten out of his house. The blamed idiot was trying to chew his way in. My neighbor almost shouted as he told the story. He beat on the floor to frighten the porky, but Salt wasn't afraid of that. He had heard me do that so often, he knew there was no danger. Next, Salt demonstrated his ability as a screen scratcher. He clawed and clawed until my neighbor thought the screen would be ripped to ribbons. In one way or another, our pesky Porky managed to keep our good neighbors awake all night long. The only relief they could get was by throwing some water on Salt, after which he would disappear under the house for a while. But they would hardly have time to close their eyes until crunch, 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 scratch, scratch, and a few honks would awaken them again. When daytime came and my neighbors were moving about their yard, tired from a sleepless night, Salt wanted to play. He ran at them, tried to climb on them, acted tough about their feet, and placed himself right in their way wherever they wanted to go. Were there, by any chance, 2 of them? I asked rather timidly, grieved at their discomfort, but still anxious to know if Pepper were around. Thank heavens, no, thundered my neighbor. 1 is enough. 1 is too much. Take him away from here, and if I never see him again, it will be soon enough. We carried the contented Salt down to our canoe and paddled toward our island, calling back our apologies as long as we could make ourselves heard. Salt, you big bum, I said to the precious pest, as he climbed over my feet, talking his happiness constantly. Don't you understand? That is the one place you shouldn't go. Those people are friends. They are perfect neighbors, but they didn't invite you there. We don't care what you do to us, for we are interested in studying your ways. But they are here to be quiet and to rest. Why in all this forest did you have to go there? But Salt kept right on honking his happiness, and took a bite at the railing of the canoe and another at my boot, just to show he wasn't listening to a thing I said. I looked at him hopelessly and found myself murmuring in inky style, "Ah, balsam juice." And that night a telegram went to Carol with the simple message, "Salt has returned." Our Porky was happy to see his island again. He grunted as we approached the boathouse. He grunted more enthusiastically as he climbed ashore. He went up to the trail to the cabin grunting, and grunted more over the bites of food we gave him. There was no question but that he was glad to get back home. "Then, you old pest, why don't you stay here if you like it so much?" His answer came the next morning. He was gone again. We called him at breakfast time, but there was no answer. We heard an empty island once more. "If only he doesn't go back there," said Jenny, indicating our neighbor's cabin. I just groaned. 2 days passed in which nothing was heard of our Porky. We had found time to read, to photograph some birds, to see the wild asters blooming at the water's edge. Then, in the cool of a still evening, came a call across the water. "Ho there!" It was the voice of our neighbor. Jenny and I looked at each other apprehensively. "Ho there, Campbells!" the call came again, and we could not dodge the fact that it was for us. "Yo, we hear you," I called back, dreading what I knew was coming. "Well, come and get that low-down pest of yours." The words came in staccato, with a definite feeling of exasperation in them. "Okay," I called back, trying to be cheerful. "Sorry, I'll be right over." I got in a rowboat and went across the stretch of water as fast as I could, one oar squeaking to the rhythm of my strokes. It seemed an endless distance over there, and in my imagination I fancied Salt had my neighbor down jumping on him. No doubt the front door was chewed entirely off the house, the screen stripped to single wires, and many new inventions of impishness carried out by our talented pest. It was almost that bad. There was Salt acting tough, my neighbors looking at him helplessly with no sign of amusement on their faces. They had endured another sleepless night. Crunching, chewing, scratching, honking had been their lullaby all night long, and it hadn't produced any rest. During the day Salt had rested, but now he was afoot again, and with such vivaciousness that they feared it prophesied another night without sleep. "Can you take him and keep him long enough for us to get a little peace?" my neighbor pleaded, his mildness making me feel worse than if he had given me the reprimand I expected. "We are tired, we came here to rest, and we need it." Bubbling apologies and promises, I took the triumphant Salt on my shoulder, and while he chewed contentedly on my head, I got into the boat. He was quite playful and bit at my fingers as I pulled on the oars, chewed at my boots for a moment, acted tough a bit, and then went up in the bow where he stood looking toward the approaching island, grunting contentedly. He was happy when he saw the boathouse, happy when he saw Jenny, happy when he reached his favorite trees, happy at the cabin door. "Then why, Salt, why don't you stay here if you like it so well?" I reasoned with wasted breath. "The one place you shouldn't go, you go. Don't you know that man would be justified in blasting you out of your hide? The only reason he lets you live is because of his friendship for me." But it was hopeless. Salt was contented with all that was happening. Even the buckets of water that were being poured on him at the neighbor's cabin were part of the program. At least he enjoyed the attention. That night we put him in a cage. We disliked to do it, for we had never kept him confined, but we had to have time to think, to reason our way through... Ouch! Don't bite. Through the new problem. So we put him in a good-sized pen, gave him plenty of food and water, and I left him. The next morning, the wood framework of the cage had been chewed to splinters, the wire cut, and he was gone. We were desperate. That day we went on a porky hunt again. We walked the trails in the forest back of our neighbors. We cruised the shores calling for Salt, trying to capture him before he went pestering again. Our efforts were utterly useless. Not a sign of him did we see. Hoping against hope, we said perhaps he had gone in another direction this time, but we knew he hadn't, and he hadn't. "Yoo-hoo, Campbells! Yoo-hoo!" The call came clear and compelling. It was early morning, and we were at the breakfast table. "He's over there," said Jenny resignedly. "Yes," I said, "and it's early morning. Those people do not get up early. Probably Salt has had them awake all night." "Yoo-hoo, Campbells!" came the call again, a little stronger. I went over, and the worst was true. Salt had put in a marvelous night. My neighbors had put in a miserable one. Buckets of water had failed to drive him away. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the shower bath. I was humble in my helplessness. Apologies were of no effect. Something had to be done. This could not go on. But I was struck with admiration at my neighbor's good humor. "I'll get rid of him," I had said, trying to face the problem fairly. "I have no right to annoy you people with my interests and enthusiasms. I'll take him so far he will never get back again." "No," said my neighbor kindly, "we don't want you to do that. We like Salt, that is, a little. If you will just come and get him quickly, we'll all try to cooperate. Now I found a whistle." And he exhibited a little metal whistle that had a very shrill note. His idea was that when Salt first appeared, he would blow that whistle and I would come as soon as possible. I thanked him for his kindness and patience and agreed, ouch, don't bite, silly, and agreed to his plan, provided he would promise not to spare me. He must blow that whistle when Salt first appeared, day or night, rain or shine, so that I could remove him in the quickest manner. I feel sure he will get over this soon. As fall comes on, he will take to the woods, and none of us will see him, I said, speaking my hopes rather than my convictions. It was agreed that this program would be initiated. To test the whistle for carrying power, he was to try it when I had returned to the island with Salt. Certainly it had a most penetrating tone. I could hear its fweet, fweet, fweet as he tried it out, and realized that no sleep, wind, or weather could keep the sound from me. I called back okay to my neighbor. Within 2 days, Salt had left the island. There was delicious silence in his regard for a few hours, and then, fweet, fweet, out I went as promised, crossing the water in my rowboat with the squeaky oarlock, hurrying to relieve my neighbor of the bequilled pest. "There he comes to meet you," my neighbor called as I pulled alongside the pier. Sure enough, there came Salt out onto the pier and into the boat. "He just arrived," commented my neighbor good-naturedly, "and I guess he expected you." Back I went with Salt to the island. I was grateful that I could get him before much annoyance had been caused. This was going to be a fine system, this whistle plan. It was a fine thing if I could endure, for Salt got it into his head that his ferry service was installed for his special benefit. It was his way of getting back to the island. He concluded that it was all right for him to swim away and go off on his secret missions into the forest, but when he wanted to return, the thing to do was to go to my neighbor's, crunch on his doorsill, scratch his screen, honk a few times. Then this man would blow a whistle. Soon he would hear the squeak of an oar, and it was time for him to go down to the pier. Now this boat would come with me in it, and he could get in and have a fine ride back home again. It was all very wonderful for him. But I was in the same position my neighbor had been. I was begging for sleep. That whistle blew incessantly, it seemed to me. I heard its fweet fweet in the middle of the night, at high noon, in the early morning, in the midst of rains, and I heard it in my dreams when I had a chance to dream. Once I tried a desperate move. I took Salt away around to the opposite shore of the lake and turned him loose. From here, in order to reach my neighbors, he would have to swim through at least a half-mile of water, or walk around a great swamp, a distance of 3 miles or more. From my knowledge of porcupines, I felt sure he would not do either. He would establish himself in these new woods, and there he would settle down. I wouldn't see him any more, but even that seemed desirable under present conditions. 10 days of peace reigned in the sanctuary, days that were quiet, nights serene. "I guess we have solved the problem at last," Jenny said at breakfast one morning. "Seems a little lonely without Salt, but it is better this way." I nodded, but even as we sat there, out in the morning air, we heard, "Fweet, fweet." "No," said Jenny, "it couldn't be that whistle. It must have been a bird." But fweet, fweet, the whistle insisted it was itself in person. Out I went to the rowboat with the squeaky oarlock and across the water to our neighbors. There was Salt on the pier, grunting his gratitude for the fine ferry service. "It's a nice day," I called to my neighbor. "Fine," said he. "Honk, honk," said Salt. But in the midst of our annoyance... Can you get... But in the midst of our annoyance, we had to pause to realize that what that porcupine had done. At least a 3-mile walk through difficult brush-filled woods was necessary to bring him back to this cabin. He had performed something little less than a miracle for a porcupine in thus finding his way. His homing instinct had guided him over ground where woodsmen would have had trouble in traveling. His coming back was a remarkable thing, even though we would rather he had not done it. Well, hope you're having a wonderful day. Have a good afternoon, and God bless.